Welcome to another edition of News Bites here on Daily World Television. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host. As predicted by Daily World newspaper, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has now been granted sweeping powers essentially for the rest of his life in politics, thanks to a referendum that has been held which barely passed, according to Turkish officials, by a margin of 51.4%, assuming this tally is accurate, that the election was fair and transparent. The Constitution of Turkey will now be rewritten, rendering its parliament essentially irrelevant, placing vast new sweeping powers into Erdogan's hands, which he can then put into law with a simple signature of his pen. What this means for Erdogan is that up until the year 2029, he will effectively be and remain Turkey's elected dictator unless he decides to quit. Erdogan has been under criticism for many, many years, especially by the European Union and democratic rights activists, for doing everything from building one of the largest palaces in the world, which he says were necessary to conduct government business using billions of dollars of taxpayer money, to locking up his opponents. Over 100,000 people remain in prison in Turkey. Turkey, not coincidentally, thanks to Erdogan, has locked up and has imprisoned the largest number of journalists in the world. These are people who have tried to report fairly and accurately on him, often not positively, and of course they end up in jail for doing that. So Erdogan has achieved what he's wanted to do. He has sidelined and imprisoned his opponents. Many of the people now in prison would have voted, of course, and because the referendum barely passed, those votes from the jailed, incarcerated opponents may have kept this referendum from passing. Erdogan used the coup that was attempted to oust him several months ago as an excuse to lock up all of his opponents, and even he admits that many of the people in jail are innocent. But this has not caused him to do the right moral thing, which is to not arrest them in the first place or let them go. The last issue that has global impact on Erdogan's referendum passing has to do with Turkey joining the European Union. There are bureaucrats in Brussels who you wonder what planet they orbit. They want Turkey to become a member of the EU, even though Turkey has never been European. Go figure. The problem is that if Turkey ever becomes a member of the EU, it will alter the power balance in the EU forever. And here's why. It's simple physics. In the EU structure, the number of representatives that go to Parliament representing their country are based on the total population of that country. Germany has the largest representation in the EU Parliament because it has roughly 80 million people in its population. Ironically, the largest number of Turks abroad in Europe live in Germany. They were, of course, against passing this referendum. Now, Turkey's population is roughly that of Germany's. And because it is a Muslim nation, and Muslim countries tend to pump out babies in larger numbers than their Western counterparts, and the population in white Europe has been declining overall steadily for the last 10 years, what will happen is that if Turkey were to be allowed to join the EU in a few years, it would enter EU membership as the most powerful nation of this 28-country bloc. This dynamic would fundamentally change things. Erdogan wants to join the EU because he gets a lot of free money by doing it, and the euro is much stronger than the Turkish lira will ever be under his rule. However, now that Erdogan has taken this distinctly undemocratic step, whatever plans he has to join the EU are now dead, or they have been put on hold for at least another decade or until he is out of power, whichever comes first.